All right. We're back again. Monday night. I'm going to run it down with you guys on the AMA like we always do over here on the channel, on YouTube, on Facebook, on X, and on TikTok. And maybe we'll get to Instagram at some point in the future when we can figure it out. Oh, man. Lots of things happening out there in the market, which I'm sure you guys are watching, just like I am. Had a small liquidation over the weekend here. A lot of people had leveraged longs in the market, and you know how that goes. Some people lose money when the market moves that direction like it did. Just another stair step down. XRP still hanging out about $2. I think Bitcoin's back to, where are we at on Bitcoin? 93,000. Bitcoin, 92.5. And Bitcoin, you know, as we all know, still unfortunately kind of manages the market. Everything moves alongside Bitcoin. And I think this is probably, you know, I've talked about this before in the past. We've got a lot of new people here on the channel. People might wonder, well, why? Why does the market move the way that it does? And why is Bitcoin the determining factor on how the market moves? Well, the simple answer is that 90% of the market is traded by bots. And a lot of these algorithms and these trading bots that are built out will take out leveraged long positions on Bitcoin to the upside. And when we see a liquidation like we did just over the weekend here, there's a capital call. And so, you know, they lose on those positions. They then have to sell other positions to be able to get enough collateral to offset those calls. And that's why the whole market moves down in tandem, and things that are not Bitcoin tend to actually have an exaggerated move because there is additional sell-off in those tokens in order to be able to meet their capital call for their losses on Bitcoin when they get liquidated. So hopefully that helps you better understand why the market dynamic exists like it does today. And same thing across the broader, you know, stock market and other markets as well. The majority of markets are traded by bots and algorithms. And that's why, you know, if you are a day trader, it's highly unlikely that you're going to make money over the long term. There's obviously, you know, 2020, everybody thought they were a day trader. You could buy whatever you wanted and the price would go up. But it's the professional traders that are able to capitalize and make money in stagnant markets or in markets where, you know, the prices are actually falling. When there's erratic price movement or there's a trend to the downside. And so one of the things that I did see in 2020, which was really interesting and really kind of persisted in 21 and 22, is most of the stock market gains were made pre and post market. During the trading day, things were actually pretty flat. And that's really, you know, I think continued. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. My wonderful wife with the tea. Cheers. Hope you guys, our week is off to a good start. So, you know, if crypto is a little bit different, though, there's not like a trading day for crypto. It's 24/7, 365. And that's the unique value proposition for blockchain distributed ledger technology is anytime, all the time. The network is up. People are able to send money. Doesn't matter. You don't need an intermediary. You can transact whenever you feel like it. It can be midnight. It can be the weekend. And you don't need a bank or somebody else in order to execute a payment, which is really cool. It's actually very unique. I saw a video of Charles Hoskinson earlier today, up in arms about the Clarity Act. You know, and justifiably so. I think there's a lot of people that have been in this industry for as long as he has, decade or more. You know, he was part of Ethereum when that was originally founded, and then obviously separated off and founded Cardano later. You know, he's upset that effectively the way that the bill was drafted, after they've spent all this money and all this time and they had bipartisan approval, it really ended up back in the hands of the SEC and the regulators and the banks and the incumbents, which, you know, I kind of live in the middle road, right? Like I see all the advantages of this technology and democratization to access to financial products, and the ability for people to manage their own wealth. but you also want protections, right? Like you still need some assurances. You probably want insurance on your accounts. You probably want some oversight by regulators to make sure that they are regulating things that are need to be regulated. When there's too much one direction or the other, I think that neither one is good. Like a completely open source decentralized ecosystem where DeFi just runs free and there's no oversight, you don't know who you're transacting with or the counterparty, and you're not able to validate that or verify, who is on the other side of the transaction. I like zero knowledge proofs. I think that privacy is going to be a big deal, but I still think there needs to be some, like, I don't necessarily care that when you trade a stock as an example, there's somebody on the other side that's buying that stock, or if you're buying it, somebody else is selling it. You don't need to know who that counterparty is, but you have a broker, you have a middleman, you have somebody that has oversight on that transaction to make sure that the things aren't malicious and that things get executed the way that it's supposed to execute, right? And over the long term, you may see AMMs step into that role, as where broker dealers sit today, for securities in particular, and then obviously there's other intermediaries or parties that are able to transact different financial products. But when it comes down to it, you still want those assurances, you still want some oversight, you still want things to be validated and checked, whether it is completely open source and decentralized or not. And I think that's the future we're moving toward. I am optimistic that in the Clarity Act there's going to be a revision that comes forth that still provides some tangible guidelines for banks and institutions to be able to adopt this and participate in the ecosystem, but doesn't give them so much power that they're able to wrangle this in and really just put themselves in the same position that they've been in for the past couple hundred years. And so with that, I'm hopeful. We'll have to see how it works. Brad Garlinghouse came out and basically said, we just need to get something passed and then we can iterate on top of that. Charles brought up the point that, the SEC passed the 1933 Act and 1940 Act, and we've had those for 90 plus years at this point. Well, not 90 plus years. We're 2026. So 33, well, that one's pretty close. 2023 would have been 90 years. The 40 Act is in the 80, more than 80 years. So, that is a long duration with no changes to those laws. And all that being said, if we do they pass the Clarity Act here with all of these things that aren't so great, it's going to be difficult to walk it back. Now, it would probably be in the government's interest to walk things back. If they over-regulate and then kind of walk things back, I think people would be happier with that rather than, every time there's been where the government takes another land grab and moves things forward, people are more up in arms about that because they feel like they're losing freedoms. So I don't know if that's their plan. Maybe they pass this in a way that it's overly regulated and over time they walk it back. We'll just have to see, and obviously we sit on the digital chamber. We talk with regulators about this regulation and how things, we think should work. A lot of compliance and oversight for what we do at Digital Wealth Partners and at Digital Ascension Group, how taxes work with all of that plays into how we have those discussions with the SEC and the CFTC and FINRA and the other regulators that we talk to through the digital chamber. When we propose, different stuff, we help them draft that stuff. And, the SEC actually took a lot of our considerations when regulating RIAs. We were the only RIA, even on the digital chamber, advocating for wealth managers to be able to participate, hold these assets, and provide financial advice to, their clients. Everybody else on the panel and in the chamber that participated in that were pretty much lawyers that have a significant interest in stake in representing certain clients or in the industry. So that was really cool to be the only people there participating in that. Obviously, we were on Capitol Hill last year advocating for, congressmen and congresswomen to pass the Genius Act and the Clarity Act. And that's where I got the insight that I told you guys all last year, that I thought that the Clarity Act would get pushed into 2026. And here we are. So, there's a lot of people out there that read things on the internet, and I do too. But I prefer to be in the rooms, have the conversations with the people, and actually know what's going on in order to be able to make informed decisions and then have an open discussion with you guys here. So, and I'm, rambling on for the first 10 minutes, let a lot of people filter in here. Over here on TikTok, I'll try to get some questions over here on TikTok tonight. Abracadabra, XRP, I love it. People don't know about that magic. All right. We'll jump into the questions here. This person has said, how will Ripple reduce their share to 20% to become decentralized? What's the plan? Will they hand off shares to Trump to pay the deficit? So this is an interesting question. I think it's been worked out for a long time. There's over 1,700 NDAs that Ripple has with other financial institutions, enterprises, counterparties. And these are negotiated agreements where they can buy XRP at a much cheaper price. One of these, Greg Kidd came out and openly disclosed that he had a option to buy XRP at 0.03 of a penny for 1 billion XRP. I don't know if he ever executed that or not. I don't know if he waived that option. I think it was later stated that he came out and waived that option. But that just kind of gives you an idea of some of the early stuff that Ripple negotiated potentially with larger bodies. Greg Kidd also made the introduction to the Fed in 2014. And so, Ripple's been having conversations with large governments globally for more than a decade. And they did escrow, 50% of the supply back in 2017. And that's what we saw cause the supply shock to push it to, $3.84 in early 2018, before we had, the prolonged bear market and the SEC lawsuit and all the other fun stuff that we've had in between then and now. But they do still own, through their wallets and the escrow, a pretty significant portion of the total amount of XRP. I think it's around, 47% that's still in escrow. And they continue to roll that. Each month they get $1 billion out of escrow that's unlocked, and then they sell what they need to onto the market, and they re-escrow a portion of that. Over the last year, they've done, about 700 million XRP re-escrowed, and they've sold about 300 million onto the market each month. So to your point, in the Clarity Act, it states that they will have, the way that it's written today, they would have another year in order to become compliant. They've been giving grace periods. We saw this in the Genius Act with Tether. They gave them a 3-year window to become compliant with the regulations, that they set out there for US-based stablecoins. So I think that they had that in mind for Ripple, that they would give them at least another 12 months, and other people as well. I mean, there's other foundations. Hyperliquid owns a large portion of their tokens. It's not just Ripple that isn't, that owns more than 20% of the supply for a certain token or protocol. Now, I am in agreement with you. My definition of decentralized is actually, and I believe that the XRPL is decentralized, and for this reason. I don't think it's who owns how much of the asset. Now, if that asset is being staked and it gives them control over transactions in the network, sure, I could agree with that. But XRP doesn't have native staking, and it doesn't allow people that are holding the token to have voting rights or the ability to manipulate transactions over the network. You actually need an 80% consensus across the validators in order to be able to enact change on the network on the XRPL. Ripple only controls 3 of those validators. There are 34 or 35 validators that, hundreds of nodes vote. These are known people that advocate for changes on the network. And then the other people support them. Basically, they're their constituents, similar to like you elect a senator or, you're a congressman in your state, and then they sit there and advocate on your behalf. Basically, this is kind of how the validators work across all of the network of nodes for the XRPL. And they all vote on stuff. And if they don't like something or they don't think it should be implemented, they vote no. And again, Ripple only has, call it 8%, 7% of those votes. My definition is that no one party controls more than 15% of the network. And so they would actually meet my personal standard for decentralization. The reason that I came to 15% is when I worked with business owners to help them scale their business and optimize value for an exit. That was something we looked at. We would look at their vendors, we would look at their employees, we would look at their customers, and we would try to make it where no more than 15% of their business was made up by one counterparty. And that de-risks the business, because if somebody were to acquire it, if they lost one big customer that made up 60% of the business because the relationship that the founder had or the business owner before them had, that's a big hit to revenue. Same thing for a vendor, right? Like if 90% of your supply chain comes from one person, they can choke you out. They could choose a competitor over you. So you want to decentralize your reliance on those counterparties, and 15% was always the number that we used. So that's, and again, that actually doesn't come from me. I went through a certification through Value Builder. If you guys don't know who John Warlow is, highly recommend reading his book, Built to Sell. He's a Canadian business owner, prolific entrepreneur, and he put together that certification that I took in order to be able to work with business owners and help scale and exit businesses. And I've implemented a lot of those principles in the business that we have today. So when it comes to, will they hand some over to the U.S. government in order to be able to offset the deficit? I think that's kind of been part of the plan the whole time. We've talked, we haven't talked to, but I haven't talked to David Sachs. I've talked to other people in government, but not him. He said in the past publicly that the U.S. government has not audited their crypto portfolio. When they were talking about, the Bitcoin reserve and the confiscated Bitcoin that they had, that they were going to put in that reserve, he made the comment that there was no audit of the, total amount of crypto that the government owned. And even if there was, if you have, call it an option to buy whatever it is at a certain price and you haven't executed it, options do expire after certain time frames. I don't know if there's an expiration on these options or these negotiated contracts that Ripple has from the 1,700 NDAs that they did early on, but they've already paid the $50 million in fines for those pre-negotiated contracts and the sale of those illegal securities. So those are good, right? Like they have validity at this point, and if somebody decides to, execute on that, then they absolutely would be able to. And I do think that's how, portions of the escrow get chopped up and spun out, and they do meet that 20% deal. Because let's say it got passed this month and they own 47% of the supply, only 1% of that gets released each month. So there's no way in 12 months that they would be able to meet that 20% threshold. They would have to hand over at least a portion of what they control to a separate counterparty to manage it. I think it could also be the IMF. They met with the IMF in 2017. There's photos of Christine Lagarde, who was the head of the IMF at the time, with Brad Garlinghouse and many other central bankers. And then obviously she went on to be the head of the ECB, or the European Central Bank, and has continued to advocate for stablecoin regulation in that region. I do think that the digital pound and the digital euro will become, will come to light and come to fruition here in the next 24 months. I think 2026 and 2027 are going to be big years for CBDCs and stablecoins. And again, not here to debate if CBDCs are great or bad or whatever you want to call them. In certain jurisdictions, they are absolutely going to go live. People participating in those ecosystems or those jurisdictions will use them. Obviously, here in the U.S., there's a lot of contention around stablecoins and CBDC, and people feel that it would inhibit their freedoms and give oversight to the government, and a lot of things that people don't want. I think that the regulation in each jurisdiction will likely coincide with the cultural norms that exist there. So, like China, their CBDC makes a lot of sense. They're communist. Russia probably has a CBDC. North Korea probably has, if they even move to blockchain, probably has a CBDC. Other jurisdictions that are more open, maybe like Dubai or Singapore, things that have been a bit more progressive, including the United States, I think will have privatized stablecoin. So it'll change based on where you live and the people that and how they want it. Next up, we got Steve. He says, will the reverse carry trade hurt us that are invested in the tactical income fund? No, I don't believe it will. So we've mitigated all the risk. Well, I can't talk about the tactical income fund. If you want to know more about the tactical income fund, you should ask your advisor. I can talk about the other funds at Digital Wealth Partners, the income fund and the growth fund. So I'll speak to those because I can't talk about the one that you mentioned publicly. The other two 506c funds the Digital Wealth Partners has, the way that we've mitigated risk on that for volatility is the margin that's taken against the asset. They only ever trade, somewhere between 40 and 60% of that. The sub-advisors that we work with were completely out of the market when FTX and Celsius and Voyager all happened, and they were also completely out of the market on 1010 when that liquidation took place. They are able to see markers 2 to 3 days before large events like that happen, so that they can hedge and also make profit on that event playing out. The income fund actually made money on 1010 because they had short positions open because they saw that some volatility could take place. So, the people that we're working with, alongside the way that we've structured everything there, I think lends itself very well to being able to not only make sure that there's not any losses or issues, but also potentially, profit from that situation playing out. Volatility is great for both of those opportunities there at Digital Wealth Partners. That is how both of those opportunities make returns. If there is volatility in the market, if things are stagnant and moving sideways, it's probably not going to work great. And it's not that it's bad; it's just not as good as if there's volatility in the market. These are market neutral strategies, and they're meant to mitigate downside risk while still giving people upside cash flow or compounding the asset depending on which one you're participating in. So again, if you are invested in those, I would ask your advisor. I'm just giving you a high level of things here. I am not. Well, this is probably a good time for my disclaimer. Not a financial advisor. This channel, this video, everything shared here is for entertainment and educational purposes only. If you need financial advice, you should speak with a financial advisor. If you need tax advice, you should speak with a CPA. If you need legal advice, you should speak with an attorney. I am none of those things. However, if you do need those resources, you can reach out to Digital Ascension Group. We have partners and people that work for us with those certifications that can provide you all that information. And then, separate of that, anything stated here are my opinions. They are not the opinions of Digital Ascension Group or Digital Wealth Partners, and should be treated as such. All right, next up in the super chat, Roscoe. They say, "Hola, what's up, man?" It's pronounced Roscoe P. Coltrane, Duke of Hazzard reference. Okay. Yeah, that's over my head, man. I should probably know that one, but I appreciate the context. He says, can XRP's price appreciate by 2030 without the domino theory ever completely coming to fruition? Thank you. Yeah, I think that, it would see some adoption, but you're not going to get the big exponential move without that happening. There will be some supply and demand shock as the ETFs continue to eat through what's available on the OTC and dark pools. And once that's gone, the volume will have to move to exchanges. But if there's not outsized demand by the exchanges and by markets and by institutions and potentially retail all at the same time, you're not going to get an exponential move. I think it's going to be that way because I believe that it needs to be a very high price for them to start using it. And for them to be able to push it to that price, really supply and demand is the only way that they're going to be able to do that. You could, people have talked about a repricing or a pegging of XRP. It needs to be dynamic and fluid. If it is fixed or stagnant, like it would be if it was pegged, it doesn't provide the same bandwidth over the long term. You could escalate volume up to whatever that price was, and then if you needed to continue to add more volume to the network for it to continue to scale and meet the new demands of markets, that were being tokenized, real world assets. Again, I've told you guys, I believe by the end of 2030, 80% of the global value will be tokenized. That's not that far from now. I mean, really just 4 years away. I believe that so 5 years, by the end of 2030, 80% of the globe is tokenized. And that's a lot of value moving on chain. XRP, I believe, will settle all of that back end. And so for it to do that, I mean, you would need the price to continue to escalate with the additional volume, but it really can't even start moving utilizing the utility or continuing to escalate because of the volume on the network until you kickstart it. A good example of this, we're going to do an event with Canary Capital for the mastermind. If you're part of the mastermind, excited to see you guys on St. Patty's Day there in Nashville with Steve and a couple other people that we have going to that event. But when talking with them, they really need an ETF to be $100 million to start getting institutional adoption. And the reason for that is no pension fund or other regulated entity can own more than 10% of an ETF. And their smallest check size that they cut is around $10 million. So for them, they've got to get to critical mass before they can even get the adoption of the institutions. Now, I view XRP very similarly. It needs to get to critical mass. It needs to have enough liquidity in it before they can start using it in a meaningful capacity to continue to drive adoption and price appreciation. And so all of that being stated, I don't think that it's going to be fixed or pegged. I think that they're going to have to use supply and demand dynamics to push it to a very high price in a very short period of time, because that's the only way that it's really going to work and get the adoption. If that doesn't happen, it's not going to see the high prices that we've talked about. Pretty confident that it will, though. 19 Trades says, my birthday's in 2 months. Happy early birthday. I'm 100% happy on a scale of 1 to 100. Thanks for all that you do for the XRP community. Wishing you and your family well. Thailand awaits your visit. I'm sure you'd love the beach. I would love to come to Thailand. That's on my bucket list. I'll tell you one of the people that I followed early on. That was Digital Dave. I don't know if you guys, I don't even know if he makes videos anymore or not, but he was on YouTube in 2020 and 21. And I watched a lot of his stuff early on. And he's actually the one that told me about Theta. And the reason I took a pretty large position in Theta in 20. And I did really well on that. He was big on T-Fuel and Theta. He really didn't talk a whole lot about XLM and XRP. He mentioned it in his videos, but he also talked a lot about Chainlink, Cardano, Zilliqa, VeChain. He was really looking at the assets that were going to have long duration utility and adoption for different, markets and applications in the real world. And that's, I liked listening to him about that stuff. Anyway, how that ties back to Thailand is he was in Thailand. He had made a bunch of money in crypto and moved there. And he was talking about, how economical it was to live in Thailand versus other jurisdictions and how well he was treated there. So definitely on the bucket list for me over the long term. 7U, thank you for the super chat. They say, God bless you, Jake. I wanted to first clarify last stream. I thought you said that XRP won't hit 4 digits until the Clarity Act, but will hit 3 digits with other catalysts. Did I mishear or misunderstand? I really think 3 and 4 digits are both possible prior to the Clarity Act. I think that 3 digits is much more likely prior to the Clarity Act, and 4 digits could absolutely come after the Clarity Act. And the reason for that is it really can't start being used for back-end settlement until it's at least 3 digits at scale, for the back-end settlement of the stock market or for SWIFT or for FX or commodities. And then, once we know how it's regulated and how it can be used and transacted with, banks can already hold crypto to be able to settle transactions. The OCC has given them the authority to do so. So, that means they can hold XRP. XRP, in my mind, is already a commodity here in the US because, the CFTC, obviously, Caroline has gone on to MoonPay at this point, but she met with Brad frequently when she was at the CFTC, and XRP is obviously listed on Binomial with a USD pair and traded as a commodity alongside Bitcoin and ETH. So, all that being said, I think it's in a unique position to be used in a crisis moment, and we'll have a supply shock that pushes it to at least 3 digits. But 4 digits could happen before the Clarity Act, but I think I don't have a certainty on that. It could be that 4 digits does not happen until after the Clarity Act is passed. The other thing I would say is I don't know when the Clarity Act is going to be passed. If we don't get to some type of consensus on it here in the next really week, it's going to be very difficult, and it could be a much longer path to market for regulation here in the US. So let's say, we go another week, they finally get something drafted, it's put up for vote. Congress is really going to be focused on the funding bill toward the end of this month. If they don't get that passed, the government's going to shut down again. And they're not going to allow competing bills to take away from that. And we saw, even with focus on that, we had a government shutdown of 40 plus days last year. If something similar were to take place, we're really into March and midterms at that point, and Congress really won't get in the full swing of things again until mid to late Q2, maybe even early Q3, before they'd even be able to vote for the Clarity Act again. And if Dems take a lot of these positions, a lot of the progressive nature that's happened in Congress, both the Senate and the House, has come from Republicans. And if they no longer have a majority, it may be much more difficult for us to see the Clarity Act passed here in 2026. Now, if we see price appreciation for XRP and some of these other digital assets, I think that there'll be some pressure on Congress to go ahead and move things through. And especially if we do see the need for the settlement of the back end of the stock market and tokenization of stocks and all these things. I mean, we just had, NYSE, New York Stock Exchange, come out and talk about tokenizing stocks today. When I was listening to their president at Swell, interviewed by Monica Long, she said, mid to late 2026, they would be tokenizing the stock market. The XRPL has a multi-purpose token that fits the bill for that, but they might use Canton, right? DTCC is invested there. And there's, the London Stock Exchange is talking about Canton. So, and I've given this separation before, but back-end settlement and tokenization of the stock market are two separate things. The money flows and the payment flows between the clearinghouses and the brokers don't necessarily have to coincide with whatever network the stocks are tokenized on. So, I don't know. A lot of people are asking about Canton. We've had a lot of people reach out about that. We'll have to see how it plays out. It looks good. I mean, obviously, it's kind of like Chainlink. Like, Chainlink has a lot of public information out there. It's probably going to be used. But how valuable is the token going to be? I look at Canton similar to like Quant. So Overledger is great. I think a lot of people are going to use Overledger. I think there's going to be demand for the token. But the token isn't to move value over the network. The token is to pay fees to participate on the network. So if there's enough demand and enough people that want to participate in an ecosystem, there's obviously demand for the token. But the volume on the token isn't going to be traded at a high rate, like something like an XRP or an XDC or an XLM, or maybe even an HBAR, right? So, those are kind of the networks that I think are going to have more price appreciation versus like Wormhole is a governance token. We had their CEO on the podcast and ran through, that whole deal with them. They might even, he was, well, I won't go down that road. I keep that to myself. Lori says, hi Jake, paid for the trust. Awesome. But I have found it difficult. Okay. If I pull my assets into it, including my LLC, do I need to rename the assets? This has been a struggle. It's a great question, Lori. So we actually have a webinar Thursday that you guys can participate in. I think we already have 1,000 people that are coming in for that, but we would love to have you there, Lori. We're going to talk about how to assign the assets in your LLC over to your living trust and what that process looks like. If you want to work with us on that, I think we're going to be like $500 to get that done, because we have had an overwhelming number of people ask about exactly what you're discussing here. And they want to make sure it's done the right way. And we may even have some type of discount code at that webinar. If you guys would, the people that are participating there, listen to the webinar, you're probably going to get a discount code on the $500. So I would encourage people to go sign up for that. Like I said, we've already got 1,000 people registered. But anybody that is thinking about a living trust, wants to understand living trusts better, what they're used for, how to use your crypto and make sure that it's done the right way. We're going to have Dan Plaskett and myself on that webinar, and we'll walk you guys through step by step on what that looks like and how to do that and what is best practice. Thank you for the question. It's a good one. And the super chat. We've got Artur's less 22. Butchered that. I'm sorry. They say morning from Lavidia with, oh my gosh, 21 below Celsius. It's like killing bacteria there where you're at. That is wild. God bless you for living wherever that is. And I hope you're staying warm. They say, can it be that Ripple keeps 20 billion from the escrow and BlackRock owns another 20 billion? Could be part of the NDAs you signed. Best wishes. I do not have a NDA with BlackRock. I will say that. So, there's it's quite possible. Like I've said, there's 1,700 NDAs and pre-negotiated contracts that Ripple has out there in the market. Those weren't disclosed in the lawsuit. They were redacted in the documents that were put out publicly. I do think that people will be able to figure out who those were post price appreciation and distribution of the escrow, because I do think there will be a distribution. And I do think that Ripple probably keeps a portion of it, but they already have close to 6 or 7 billion XRP that they use to facilitate their business with. And when I actually asked them in 2023 at Consensus, because we had some clients with their assets at standard custody, and I've always been trying to figure out how we can provide additional value and get people returns on their XRP. I actually talked to Ripple back in those days and said, hey, would we be able to participate with ODL and lend you guys the XRP, and then y'all do whatever you're going to do with it, and then pass back some returns to our people. And they said, why do we need your XRP? We have, at the time, they had 4.8 billion. And I was like, okay, sorry I asked, But yeah, I do think that there's likely going to be a scenario where BlackRock holds a pretty significant portion of XRP, either through their ETFs or for other means. As a liquidity provider, Ripple may do the same. And then again, like I mentioned, the IMF or a higher regulatory body might oversee a portion of that escrow as well. All right, Steve, my man. We already went over this one. We got Mike Watson. How are you, sir? Any knowledge of China and UAE allegedly using Enbridge to trade a boatload of gold contracts for oil a few weeks ago, bypassing SWIFT and US petrodollar? I think that that's quite plausible. I don't have any direct information about that. But yeah, I mean, the petrodollar's gone. We know that countries in the Middle East are selling oil in other currencies. When we pulled out of Iraq, we effectively, defaulted on that deal where we said we were going to, continue to protect them with our military, with a deal that was negotiated by Nixon in 1974. And since then, we really have seen, many transactions that have happened both with Russia, China, and other counterparties where they've sold oil in other currencies aside from the dollar. And I think that's going to continue and probably expand, like you mentioned, through other means. People want to transact, in a way where they can't be circumvented or displaced by some other central authority like the U.S. and the SWIFT system. You have for the BRICS nations or BRICS Plus, whatever you want to call it, that have decided to use chips, which is the direct competitor to SWIFT, and China and Russia really kind of run that on who can participate in that ecosystem. But even there's a central authority or a couple of authorities that can remove your access to that if they don't like what you're doing. So there needs to be some decentralized application where people trust a protocol or a network that can't be circumvented, stopped, frozen. And that's why, I think that XRP sits uniquely positioned to be able to provide that. XRP itself cannot be frozen. It cannot be clawed back. Once it's transferred from one party to the other, it's settled and that's final. And everybody validates transactions on the network to trust it, not to be able to profit off of it, like many of the other networks. Sometimes the best incentive is no incentive. David Schwartz has said that a few different times. So, yeah, it's quite possible that they traded oil for gold. I do think that oil and gold will be pegged. I think there will be a peg there. I think there'll be a certain amount of gold that is, tradable for oil, out of any country globally. And I think that'll be the peg that stabilizes everything else. All right. Hey. Chris says, Christ of 7920 said, or Christoph, not sure which one it is. Silver, almost $100. Let's see where silver is. Let's take a gander over here at the silver chart. Silver futures price. 93.17 is where we're at. Where are we at on futures though? Gold, silver futures 500. That's not what I want. Here it is, investing.com. I don't know if you guys use investing.com. I look at this website frequently. Over here on TikTok, they say 93.5. I got 93.257, up 5% on the week. Is that on the week? On the day? Not sure. Anyway, yeah, it's on the 15 hour. No, it's not. It's got to be on the 24 hour. I've called 100 for a long time. I thought maybe we had topped out a little bit earlier in the year when we got up to around 80. And obviously there was a pullback there, but it's continued to move higher here. I've said all the way back to really 2021 and 2022 when I was on Twitter, debating people, and people can back me up on this. I said $100 silver was really kind of the highest that I saw it going, because it just becomes unaffordable to produce certain products beyond that. And that's why JP Morgan, I think, has been in a position to spoof the market and keep the price suppressed for as long as they have, because it should be much higher. Relative value to the dollar, silver should be much higher than what it is right now, even higher than $100. It just economically, it doesn't work globally, with everything that's gone on and what's produced with silver. Now, if they can find a alternative that could fit into that position, call it graphene, I think, that actually, but you got to make that a reasonable price to produce it, which really doesn't quite exist. There's a lot of companies working on that solution, but until that's economical to produce and involve in manufacturing processes, I don't think that they can allow silver to continue to escalate past about $100. I think that there's going to be a sharp pullback in silver and gold, probably gold first and then silver. And I think that gold will pull back to around 2,100. I think that silver will pull back down to 50 in a big move to the downside. Whenever that happens, I think it could happen likely when the reverse carry trade happens and all those liquidity gets sucked out of the market. I think that both of these could see significant downside. That's just my opinion, right? There's people that are much smarter than me that continue to talk about silver going to 500, 1,000, very high prices, but they're also expecting gold to continue to grow too. And they're looking at the gold to silver ratio. We're just now back to a reasonable gold to silver ratio. it's about 45 to 1. The historical average for the gold to silver ratio is around 140 to 1. Biblically, we're around 14 to 1. And if you look at what's in the ground, it's actually about 8 to 1 is what the ratio should be. So just like I have done a ton of research on all of this stuff. I could argue the other direction very easily, and yet this is still my opinion, and it's contrary to most other people. So again, I don't make an opinion on things unless I could argue both sides of it. And I'm pretty confident that around $100, I could be off by 10%. Maybe it goes over 100 by a little bit, but I think there's probably going to be a pretty significant pullback to around $50 silver when the reverse carry trade unwinds. William says, hey, Jake, keep leading the way. Thank you, man. I appreciate the super chat. He says, thoughts on Trump going to Davos to block Project Agora? How does Agora affect XRP? Does Clarity Act affect Agora? You're concerned about XRP dev, TVI, or TVL progress? Need amendments now, right? Question mark. Let's look at the amendments over here on the XRPL. If you guys haven't seen that, you want to know what that looks like, you can go to xrpscan.com/amendments, and you can pull up what amendments are being voted on, where they're at in that process. And it actually shows you there's 34 validators. So I said 35 or 34. It kind of fluctuates there. Right now there's 34 validators, and they do have an 80% consensus on the 5 different fixes that were proposed on the network. Those all look like they have about 7 days and 18 hours left until those are implemented on the network. So we're about 1 week in. There's a 2-week hold period from the time that these actually meet, the 80% plus 1 validator benchmark on the network, and they have to hold above that amount in order to continue to be, put forth and implemented. The ones that I'm waiting on currently that are up for vote are batch, well, actually all of them, token escrow, batch, permission DEX, and permission domains. Permission domains is right on the cusp here at 27. They need 28 votes. At 28 votes, it's pushed over 80% and 1 validator. And then that will start the 2-week clock. Permission domains is probably the biggest thing here in 2026 for the adoption of the mainnet and the XRPL by institutions, because they want to know the counterparties that are participating in ecosystems. You can tie your digital identity and your credentials to your permission domain, and that's what allows you to unlock access to certain liquidity pools or other opportunities on the network in order to be able to participate. This will be on the back end of a lot of things. The average person, you'll probably still be dealing with a wealth manager, a broker-dealer, or a financial institution for, that may get phased out over time with AI. There's a lot of new things coming to market about how to manage your finances, but it's not quite the level, the institutional level that a lot of, family offices and other wealth managers can provide. But over the next 2-3 years, probably, and we're on the forefront of that. That's all stuff that we're looking at to be able to help our clients with. Anyway, back to the question here with Project Agora. I don't think it really matters for XRP adoption, which is kind of sad to say. And this is actually kind of goes back to, Charles Hoskinson's point. Brad is just advocating for any regulation because it doesn't matter for XRP. XRP can be used, quote unquote, for good or for evil. And if you view Project Agora as evil, again, like depending on the jurisdiction you're in, it could be the social norm for your government to have a lot of oversight and control on things. Here in the US, that's not the case, and we want to keep it that way. But, when it comes down to it, it really doesn't matter for XRP. XRP is going to be the backbone of the financial system, irrespective of which system gets chosen. But I do think that Trump going there and advocating for the US's position where, things are, privacy is maintained and freedoms are maintained, I do think is going to help out. And I do think there's going to be a choice by countries versus, just being subject to the demands of the World Economic Forum. We want liberty, we want freedom, we want privacy, we want all those things, but we also want to be able to participate globally with other people on a level playing field. where, our efforts and value provided is what, is shown. And that's how we win. The more value we create, the more demand GDP we create, the better standing we have globally. And I think that that's what he's going there to advocate for. And to your point, until we have these, other amendments on the XRPL, it's going to be difficult to see, institutional adoption. But again, we're right on the precipice of that here in the near future. We just went through that one. Next one down. We already did this one also. It always kicks me up in the chat here. We are almost an hour in. I'm going to go ahead and scroll to the bottom here of all the super chats. And just know, if you do a super chat from now to the end, I'm probably not going to get to it. You're going to have to message it to us, and I will pick it up next time. And I apologize to anybody that sent us super chats and we didn't get to them this week, because I don't have them printed out here on my desk. And I will remind my wonderful spouse that we need to do that, because I think she did email me some. Let's look here. If I got an emailed one, I will print it out here. Yeah, I got one. I actually have it. My wife emailed it to me. She's on top of it. This one says, hey guys, great live stream. I have a question from my SC last Wednesday because it did not, super chat last Wednesday because it did not get answered. I did not have a screenshot of it. I did not know that I needed one. Jake said I could ask here and it would get answered. And it is. For $10, Deez says, my question was, if we get price appreciation before the Clarity Act, and then we get clarity, how long will we be able to buy XDC, XLM, etc. for cheap? Actually, I think we did answer this one last week. I think we did print it out. And I talked about, I think XRP will appreciate first, and the others will appreciate over time, kind of like Solana, as the networks get adopted. Southern BitTrail says, what is Casino Coin doing on the XRPL? Is something there? It's not a project that I know a ton about. It's not something I've really looked into or given a lot of time and effort on. Could do great. Things that are attached to the XRPL will probably see some appreciation. Once the asset itself gets adopted, there will be a lot of liquidity in the ecosystem, and it will look for places to go. Just like you can imagine, a flood coming through a creek bed. There's a lot of, side creeks and things off of the river that also get an influx of liquidity. So we could see, some liquidity move into Casino Coin. There's another group that I've talked to that I think is well positioned to be able to capitalize on that, at least with Indian reservations and those casinos. I don't know about the Wynn in Las Vegas and some of the other ones. But as far as the Indian casinos go, I think there's another project that I'm aware of that will do very well there. So not advocating for or against Casino Coin, but it's not something that I personally have any interest in. What's this person say? Oh, Brian Armstrong. Yeah, they talked about that. Trump removing his backing of Coinbase. There was a little back and forth between Brian Armstrong and Eleanor Terrett over there on Twitter. If you guys want to go watch the drama, I would encourage you to go read that. It's pretty good. We got Edit Guy. He says, Jake Adamas. Appreciate you, man. Can you explain why the U.S. 10-year yield is climbing? Shouldn't it be falling? So when people are selling treasuries, there has to be a higher interest rate in order to incentivize people to buy them. So as people sell bonds, the interest rates have to rise to meet demand and incentivize people to hold them. So that tells me that people are selling the US 10-year treasury if the yield is rising. Now, that's concerning because people believe that whatever the interest rate is it's paying out is not high enough for where yield or prices will be in 10 years, or that they have a better opportunity somewhere else. You're going to see a rotation out of those treasuries and other short duration and long duration U.S. treasuries when the reverse carry trade unwinds. There's going to be a rotation from our treasuries into domestic treasuries there in Japan. They hold about $1.6 trillion of U.S. debt that will be flowing onto the market. And stablecoin issuers will be the ones buying that debt. A lot of that is short duration, what's owned there by Japan. And that is exactly what's needed to back the stablecoins here in the U.S. per the Genius Act. So there will be plenty of demand for U.S. Treasuries, but it'll likely be at a fairly high interest rate. Let's take a look at what the U.S. 10-year Treasury is. We're currently at 4.257 on the 10-year. And it's not really rising that aggressively. I mean, we were back down at 4 just a few months ago in October of 2025. And then we went up and we pulled back again around to 4% at the end of November. And since then we've moved up kind of aggressively from there back to 4.2. So, it's a 5% move over the last, call it 30 days, a little bit longer than that, 45 days. It's not overly crazy in treasuries. Similar over there on, the Japanese bonds. We continue to see those climb, but until there's an aggressive move, it's really not a problem. And we want the U.S. treasuries to move higher because the more interest they're paying, the less likely people will rotate out of those into Japanese treasuries. But we do have the FOMC here this month, toward the end of the month, I think 27th, 28th, where the Fed is expected to lower interest rates again, one more time, 25 basis points. We also have Japan, the BOJ, coming out this week with their interest rate hike. So they are expected to raise 25 basis points, but there are rumors that we could see more, somewhere between 75 and 100 basis points. That type of move, that type of jump would likely cause the reverse carry trade to unwind. Just because it's exaggerated and it's not something that the market is expecting. So we will have to see what the black swan is. Scuba Steve, love it. They say, what do you think about Lewis Jackson's hypothetical thesis of XRP being used by liquidity providers like Evernode versus banks holding the asset? Banks are liquidity providers, and they're literally been given the ability to hold digital assets by the OCC to pay fees on the network. What do I want to say about Evernorth? I'll know more Wednesday. Let's see here. Yeah, so they're going to be providing liquidity in new DeFi applications and ecosystems, seeding those at Evernorth. Continue to foster, liquidity on the XRPL, kind of being first to market in different applications, building products to help drive demand for XRP. On the other side of liquidity pools, I think they'll be participating in those. I think as AMMs get adopted, they'll be participating in those. All those things to be able to, one, lock up XRP and drive demand for it, but two, generate their return on the XRP that they're going to be paying out to investors through a dividend. I think that people that, buy that stock, we actually talked about this in the mastermind yesterday on the town hall. Some people, are like, is Evernorth a good investment? Evernorth is a couple ticks up the risk curve for an allocation to XRP. So if you just held the bearer asset, not a whole lot of risk. I mean, there's volatility, right? But Evernorth is a DAT, or a digital asset treasury company. We've seen others like this, that are like MicroStrategy, Tom Lee's company, and there's been many other DATs, that were formed middle of last year. There was a lot of people doing those. Some of them are trading below NAV. So what does that mean? Net asset value. So that means their share price is actually trading lower than a 1-to-1 with the amount of assets that they're holding. That's the problem with the DAT. It can trade below the net asset value. It can also trade above the net asset value. It's kind of like a levered play on whatever the underlying asset is. So if you wanted an exaggerated position on XRP, if you thought it was going to do well and you thought that the company could manage its treasury well and generate returns, and walk back and forth between buying the stock and buying the asset and raising debt on the open market, then it's probably a good investment. But again, you're going to need a higher risk tolerance if you're participating in a DAT versus holding the XRP itself, because XRP is always going to be a 1-to-1. ETFs are always going to be a 1-to-1. Evernode is kind of a moving target. It could trade below NAV and it could also trade, above NAV. Velo or Vivo Power, I got to listen to their CEO, and they're buying Ripple stock alongside XRP because it's trading at a 4-to-1. So the amount of XRP that Ripple holds is actually about 4 times more valuable than the share price of Ripple. And this was before the tender offer at 250. Actually, it was actually right about the same time as the tender offer at 250. So that's a unique way of looking at it. If you were buying, Ripple equity, it's kind of you're getting a 4 times multiplier at the current price of XRP. So if you think XRP is going to be a much higher price, Ripple itself would pretty much be a DAT also, alongside Evernode. But Evernode is going public through a SPAC. It hasn't completed the SPAC yet. It's unusual that they would change the ticker. XRPN is the ticker. Before the SPAC was done. They actually did that last year, which again, very unusual for that type of thing, but cool, to let people know, where to buy it before the SPAC is complete. So I've participated in one SPAC in my lifetime. It was for Nikola, which was a hydrogen-based trucking company. I bought in at like $12. And this was one of the few trades I made outside of Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Tesla in 2020. I put like five grand in. It wasn't anything crazy, but it did really well because it ran up to $75 after the SPAC until people figured out that it was a sham and they had just rolled a truck down a hill and they didn't actually have a working product. I am not AI, Brandon. Anyway, waiting on them for them to finalize the SPAC over there at Evernode. But it's something that is also interesting for financial products that we're looking at. In the insurance, the diversification stuff that we're looking at, you can hold a certain percentage of each type of asset, and a DAT doesn't have a look through like an ETF does, so it technically counts as a different taxonomy or a different asset versus XRP or Bitcoin or whatever else you're holding. So you could hold a portion of your insurance policy for PPLI in Bitcoin, and then also a portion in MicroStrategy. Even though they are correlated, they're not the exact same thing. Truest of Hearts 12. Very cool. They say, General Chat misses you. We are going to need you to come back 3 times a week for mental health check so we can refuel with your good juju. I can do that. I have slacked a little bit on the general chat this week. I appreciate the reminder. I will come see you guys over there in the mastermind. If you want to participate in the mastermind, I haven't even talked about that tonight. We would love to have you in there. This is the last month for social membership, for you to be able to join social membership. A lot of people have misconstrued that. Social membership's not going away for anybody that's already there, but nobody else will be able to join for $25 a month moving forward. So if that sounds cool to you, you want to try it out, this is likely the last month that you'll be able to get that. Well, it will be the last month you'll be able to get it. So again, you can go to beyondbroke.com and use the code beyondbroke, all capitalized, the number 1, and then MO gets you the first month for a small discount there, like $20 in social. And that'll also give you access to all the in real life events. We got one tomorrow. John Deaton up in Boston. We got a dinner for him and a mastermind event. Some other cool people are going to be there, including Mickle, if you guys follow him. Mickle Mafia. He will be up there supporting John Deaton in his race for the Senate, and many others from the mastermind community. And then, like I mentioned, we're going to have the event in Nashville, Tennessee on St. Patty's Day this year with Canary Capital. We'll continue to co-host very cool events for people that participate in the mastermind all across the U.S. We do more in real life events than any other community in crypto, and I can say that confidently. We will continue to do that, especially post price appreciation. We're going to have a lot of really cool stuff like yachts in Monaco and other fun things for people to do. Cryptoniums9 says, hey, Jake, the JPY 10-year is at 2.32. How much longer is Japan going to hold out? They're driving me crazy. People smarter than me are saying that around 2.4, 2.5, that's when things are going to get a little crazy. And I think we could, to your point, might even be able to see that toward the end of this week when the Bank of Japan does raise interest rates. So, wild times we're living in. There will be a rotation that is going to play out. We are going to see all the things that I've talked about for almost 2 years now. March this year will be 2 years when I put out the first Domino theory video. If you haven't watched that, I would encourage you to go check it out. Talks about how everything leads to price appreciation for XRP with global macroeconomic events, all set up like dominoes. And the first one of those, in my opinion, is a spike in oil, a geopolitical conflict that causes a spike in oil that pushes to, Japan having to raise interest rates aggressively. And then the dominoes fall, markets fall, problems happen, liquidity crisis, problem, reaction, solution. We need XRP, and off to the moon we go. It is a 3-part series if you want to go watch all 3 videos over there on YouTube. I'm not as animated in the early ones. I've tried to get a little bit better and more fun to watch on camera, and interact with you guys. The first one, I'm very monotone and serious. So if you could bear it, grit and bear it, I do appreciate it. Rick Johnson, my man, he says, Mr. Beefcake, what's up, my dude? Please tell us what exactly it will take to see the US dollar crumble to being worthless at TP for Beavis. Beavis and Butthead for reference there. Conditions and time frame from start to finish, please articulate. I would, all right, well, so start would have been 1944 when U.S. dollar became a global reserve currency instead of the Bancor coin at Bretton Woods. And obviously it was backed by gold at that point, and was, slowly devalued over time as we continued to protect our empire and, use military force to affect that. Until 1971, when we were in Vietnam and other countries were starting to realize what was going on, and they started to sell their dollars for gold, redeem gold from the U.S. Treasury, from the Fed. And they then decided, we were going to close the gold window August 15th, 1971. Nixon closed the gold window and effectively moved the world to floating exchange rates. Since then, we've continued to see, the inflation rate of the dollar escalate over time. But that's where it really kind of started to accelerate. The devaluation of the dollar was after 1971. If you listen to Ray Dalio talk about that, he was involved very young at the time in markets, and got to see the stock market rise when that happened. And it gave him a lot of insight because he thought it would fall. You can also listen to Robert Kiyosaki. His rich dad told him, when that happened, that gold was going to be the thing to own. And sure enough, here we are in 2026. As the currency continues to collapse, gold is having a meteoric rise here to the highest it's ever been in history. We are coming to the end of this. There is going to come a point in the near future this year where they try to shore up the US dollar. And I think they'll be able to. We have enough gold here in the US to be able to back the treasuries. They're going to issue 50-year bonds, which I think will kick the can for a long time, and likely shore up the US dollar and it'll maintain some of its power, but we are going to move to a global world, a global economy where everybody participates on their own efforts. There's multiple sovereign currencies that people want to be holding. Family offices already know this. They hold their wealth across multiple currencies in order to be able to hedge inflation across different economies. And, I think that more people will be willing to do that, especially with stable coins. It'll be very easy to be able to transfer, your wealth in between different currencies and different providers, depending on who you trust and what the best incentives are. So all that being said, I don't think the US dollar is going anywhere anytime soon. I know a lot of people are telling you otherwise. I do think there's enough demand for US Treasuries because of the Genius Act that the bonds will be stabilized. And the bond market is the backbone for the financial system until XRP really is implemented as the backbone on everything. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents. I know a lot of people, again, are fear mongering and telling you should sell every single dollar and, get into gold and silver because they're going to continue to rise. Look, I'll say this too. I have biases. We have companies. We provide services and products. I come on here and talk about them. I come on here and talk about them because I'm excited about them and I use them. And there are other people that promote certain things that also are excited about them and use them. But just know, like, people have incentives, right? And I don't hide that here. We have businesses, we make money, we provide services, we try to help people and provide as much value as we can. Other people do that different ways. People that are an affiliate for a gold and silver seller probably talk about that a lot. That's not an affiliate that we have. Not that I don't think that they're good investments, and I obviously spend time and talk about them, and they've done exceptionally well here in 2020, late 2025, early 2026. But like I said, I think there's going to be a big pullback. So I sold all of my precious metals last year. And obviously, it's gone. Both of them have gone up. Silver more than gold. Silver has probably gone up 50% since I sold mine, and gold's up another 25% since I sold my gold. I rotated all that into XRP. But again, like, I'm okay with missing out on some of those gains. I think I'm going to make way more on the XRP, and that's why I made that rotation. I did well on the precious metals. I bought those back in 2020. So, if you've been holding it for a while, I'll say this same thing I do about crypto. You never go broke taking profits. So I don't know where you guys are at with precious metals. The brokers make money either way. JM Bullion and all the other ones out there. I saw a billboard for JM Bullion the other day, which is wild to me. I've never seen a billboard for JM Bullion. That just tells me how well they're doing. And, like, obviously they want to get that out there and be able to continue to push the product because they're making a ton of money. Which, again, happy for them. I think they're doing great. They provide, good service to people. I just, again, want to encourage people to look at things objectively. Same thing with crypto. You dollar cost average in, you probably want to dollar cost average out. And I think that, people taking profits, again, can't give you financial advice, over the last, 3-4 months here are probably going to do really well if they rotate those profits into other assets. All right, continuing to run through the super chats here. We've got another 45 minutes before we wrap it up tonight. We have another one. We got AA Jesse says, Sup, Jay. Hoping if you got my book, Find Your Freedom, A Case of Decentralized Currency, sent you a copy about a month ago. It was published today on Amazon. Maybe leave a review. Appreciate you, man. I bet I did. I have some books at the office that I haven't read yet, but now that you've reminded me, I will pick that up this week, and I will go leave you a review over there. If anybody else wants to go leave Jesse a review, I'm sure he would love that. Go check out his book over here on Amazon, Find Your Freedom, A Case of Decentralized Currency. Sounds like a really good read. And again, appreciate very much so that you sent me a copy. I don't know if it's signed or not. I'll have to go look. But, sounds like a good read, and I'll have to check it out and leave you a review. And again, if you guys want to go do that, I'm sure he would appreciate it as well. Rob, my man, he says, do you recommend buying Bank Social? Buying Bank Social. Do you think the price will go up? Bank Social has a token. John has a token. Sure does. BSL. I'll say this. So John and his group are in the same building as us. Great people. I think that I can tell you for sure that they have a lot of traction with a lot of credit unions. As far as their token goes, I don't know how that's being used in their ecosystem. I'll have to ask him. It looks like it's been around for a long time. I say a long time. 2022 is when it was launched. Bank Social, it's only a $5 million market cap. There's really not enough liquidity in this thing to do much right now. And I don't know that they've been able to generate enough demand for it. Circulating supply is about 15 billion, 14.99 billion. So I'm sure some have been burnt for transactions on the network. That's probably how that works. I'll ask John about it. Again, I'm not ever going to get on here and tell you guys I know about something if I don't. I could speculate on it based on the tokenomics, but until I understand how it's actually used and what's going to drive demand for it, it could go. I mean, I know that they are signing credit unions at a pretty rapid rate and implementing their technology and stuff, but their technology stack doesn't necessarily translate to adoption for the token. Maybe over the long term it will, but I'd have to better understand that in order to be able to, speculate on where the price could go. Michelle, excuse me. She says, I butchered that. I'm sorry, ma'am. She says, but with all the good news in UE and Japan, why would we need US for price appreciation? Appreciate you. I'm assuming she means the UAE. So you don't. That's my whole point with the Clarity Act. It doesn't need to be passed. I'll say this. I think that BlackRock and Ripple are much more tightly coupled than people realize. BlackRock was tapped and moved into the position that they are, in my opinion, to solve the debt crisis. 2008 and everything that happened, they were, moved in to be able to repackage that debt and sell it off over a longer duration and make sure that we didn't have an economic collapse. And they are kind of a proxy for the Fed or the government to be able to not necessarily manipulate. Support is probably a better word. Support the stock market and economy. They own, large percentages in multiple corporations. Vanguard, same way. It's not like BlackRock's the only one. It's just the one that's, most people look at. And again, I think have been tasked with solving this debt crisis that we're in. When their demand for XRP starts, that's when you're going to see significant price appreciation. I've talked about, an ETP or an ETF here in the US that is BlackRock, spot ETF for XRP. Confident that that is coming at some point. We saw Wisdom Tree withdraw their S1 for their XRP ETF. Unusual. Not sure why they did that. Maybe they thought they couldn't compete, that there was already enough competition on that asset, and that's why they withdrew it. Or maybe they know that a big player is coming to town, and they didn't want to be in opposition or competition with them. I have to see which one of those it was. But I do expect here, I'll take a gamble. I think in 2026, we are going to see a BlackRock ETF on XRP, a spot ETF for XRP, or some type of product for XRP from BlackRock. And again, I think their incentives are aligned with Ripple and for the price appreciation of XRP to be able to solve the crisis that we're going to see, the credit call globally when the reverse carry trade unwinds. Cotton Clarks says, legend. What's up? Thank you for the super chat and the kind words. Spot silver is off the chart. Could it be hidden black swan that could sneak up in before oil flares up to trigger the reverse carry trade? I think it puts like banks and institutions on their back foot. They already have huge unrealized losses. And if it's like the reverse carry trade and oil or the straw that breaks the camel's back. Like they can deal with one problem, and silver is a problem for them, believe me. Now, many people believe that JP Morgan has gone long on silver and being able to swap that out. What's reverse repo at? Let's take a look here. On New Year's Eve, reverse repo. Reverse repo spiked to $75 billion. Actually, it was $105 billion, which is the highest that we have seen in a long time. Back in 2023, we were at trillions in reverse repo. This is the highest spike we've seen in the short term here after a pretty extended period where we really didn't have much at all. Yeah, up to 105 billion on New Year's, and then back down here. Really just a couple billion each night that the Fed is injecting into the economy for the banks lending them. All that being said, I think that could have been what they used to go long on silver and take those positions and kind of, hedge and make sure that they were going to be okay and solvent. I don't see that it's going to be a crisis. I mean, JP Morgan owns a lot of silver. The higher the price of silver goes, they actually are offsetting their unrealized losses. Other banks also may own large portions of physical silver. And the higher the price goes, they're offsetting unrealized losses. So I don't believe that silver is going to be the catalyst for, the black swan event. I do think that, people are going to do well on silver and have done well on silver. And I've seen a lot of people start to sell their silver. Again, not advocating for or against that, just talking about what I'm seeing, from clients and people in the market. But it is going to be oil. It's going to be oil that causes the reverse carry trade to unwind. Again, my personal opinion, just one guy on the internet. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. Not the smartest guy in the world. I listen to people smarter than me all the time and try to, piece stuff together. I listen to over 40 people across, channels and different things, read their stuff on a regular basis in order to put together my economic outlook and where things are moving. And hopefully you're doing the same. Hopefully you're watching me and a bunch of other people in order to be able to, figure out what's actually going on. Southside Crypto says JPY at 2.3 on the 10-year. How's the carry trade looking? I'd expect to start seeing an unwind soon. Japan is standing on the edge of a cliff. I agree. Again, I think around 2.4, 2.5 is where we start to see a rotation, especially if we see the Fed come out this week or actually at the end of the month and lower interest rates. And if we have, Japan raise interest rates aggressively during their meeting this month, could happen a lot sooner than later. And we got Davos this week. We didn't even talk about Davos outside of Project Agora that was mentioned earlier. Big stuff usually happens when Davos is in effect, and a lot of changes coming down the pike here. So, highly recommend you keep your head on a swivel and continue to watch the news that's coming out of Davos. We got Brad Garlinghouse at Davos as well. This is a good one. They say, praiseworthy life. They say, Jake, my bro in Christ. Thank you. Appreciate you, man. God bless you. I hold XRP ETFs at Fidelity. Very, very nice. Are they as good as XRP coins when it comes to price appreciation? Drawbacks other than not my keys, not my coins. Well, I think a lot of people that are holding the bearer asset, XRP, or other crypto tokens will be able to generate yield by participating in institutional DeFi applications by the end of 2026 here. So if you wanted additional cash flow against or off of the XRP, an ETF is not going to be able to do that. There was one dividend paying XRP ETF that pays 3%, I think. Regular ETFs that are spot, you're only going to see the appreciation. You're not going to get additional cash flow or additional benefits. Now, you can margin those, actually probably at a higher LTV than you can through some of the other lenders that are out there, and maybe even at a better rate than what's available out in the market against the bearer asset today. Over the long term, I think that you'll be able to borrow against the bearer asset at a lower interest rate and a higher LTV than what you'll be able to do on the ETFs. So, things change in today's climate. Seems like a great allocation if you're just looking for price appreciation. Again, I think that that's probably also, one more tick down the risk curve than holding the actual asset. So like Evernode is a couple ticks up the risk curve because it's a DAT. An XRP ETF is probably a lower risk option to be able to get an allocation to XRP versus holding the bearer asset itself. Now, less risk, less return, more risk, more return is kind of how that works, right? So I think you'll have more flexibility and opportunities to be able to use the XRP to your benefit over the long term. But the ETF is going to give you a one-to-one price appreciation. They hold a certain amount of XRP per share of the ETF. If they have to do a stock split over the long term on the ETF, they could, or they could just tokenize it and people could own 1,000th of a share, later on, like I think they probably will. And yeah, so, that's my 2 cents on holding XRP itself versus the ETF. And hopefully that helps you. Again, not financial advice, just hopefully providing you some education and entertainment. Marlon Jordan says, Evernode announcing they will IPO in Q1 of 2026. Does the success of the Evernode IPO depend on the price of XRP Q1? Just wink if the answer is yes. I'll know more Wednesday. But yeah, I don't think XRP, they already have 1 billion XRP. They're going to do a SPAC. I think the price could appreciate from where it's at today just based on them completing the SPAC. Again, if they are able to execute on the vision, which I think Ashish and David Schwartz and Michael Arrington will all be able to do that. There's a lot of other good people there at Evernode that came from Ripple or other places to help them execute on that vision. I think they'll do very well. And an IPO's not quite the correct term. Again, it's a SPAC, which is an acquisition of the fund through a public company and then a renaming of the public company. So, there will be a public listing. It's really kind of like you can front run it and buy it now if you think it's going to do well. Again, not advocating for or against that. Can't give you financial advice. But, if you did want a couple ticks up the risk curve from holding XRP itself, and you do anticipate, things appreciating aggressively, I do think Evernode is going to be, I personally think Evernode is going to be a good opportunity. Again, you should do your own research. Don't take my word for it. Not advocating for you to invest in it. I think that we will probably take a position with some of our clients. At least, I know some of the advisors over there at Digital Wealth Partners are looking at it. But yeah, I do think, it will definitely drive more demand for XRP, which would coincide with price appreciation. New York Stock Exchange new digital platform will enable tokenized trading experiences, including 24/7 operations, instant settlement, blockchain-based post-trade systems. Who might this partner be? Probably R3, if I was going to guess. Have to find out. Wild Sea says Dallas dinner was great. It was great to have you there. Appreciate you coming. They say Japan's 10-year now above 2.3. What do you think the Bank of Japan will do this Friday? Could an increase cause the carry trade to unwind? It absolutely could. But again, like I've talked about, I don't think they want to be the bearer of bad news or to blame for this happening. I think that they would much rather point to a scapegoat like oil spiking, versus them being the bad guy in that situation and causing things to happen. And again, appreciate you coming to the dinner. We do a lot of private dinners, one a month, for people. It is, not cheap to come to that, but I can guarantee you will meet awesome people, and I will be there and available to answer all your questions. And we do pay for the dinner and a hotel stay here in Dallas. If you would like to, come check that out, meet awesome people, we would love to have you. You can just go to the website at digitalfamilyoffice.io and book a time, either to meet with me or to go to the dinner. All right, we got James, Mr. Robertson. He says kind of the same thing here. Sup, Jake? CoinDesk says New York Stock Exchange targets weekend investors with new blockchain platform 24/7 stock trading. What percentage XRP will handle this? God bless you, your family, and everyone here. Thank you for the kind words, and God bless you and your family, brother. What percent XRP will handle this? R3 was in a lawsuit with Ripple in 2014, 2015, where they settled on 1 billion XRP. They were originally allocated 5 billion XRP, and they were mad because they were going to have to pay more than what the market price was at the time for the XRP, and that's why they sued them. If you ask either one of them about the other, they will tell you there was a lawsuit and they are no longer affiliated or partners. Both of them say almost the same exact script when you ask them, which is interesting. Anyway, all that said, I think that R3 will play a role in back-end settlement through Project Ion, which they created with the DTCC. And again, they only had 1.04 billion XRP, probably sold some of that to fund their business over the past, almost a decade. So, let's say they had 500 million XRP left available. XRP would have to be a really high price if that was all the XRP that was going to be used to settle the back end of the stock market. Now, is there a separate allocation? Is there another, option on XRP for the DTCC to buy a certain amount, or Project Ion for Project Ion? Possible. Is there another counterparty like BlackRock or somebody else that would supply that XRP? Possible. Really just comes down to, when you ask what percentage will handle this, I don't know if you mean percentage of the supply, percentage increase. Again, XRP, I believe, will have to be at least 3 digits in order to support the back-end settlement of the stock market. And that's almost kind of been validated by, it reaching those prices. We've seen price move over there on Kraken to $91 per XRP. We also saw up a bit at around $100 per XRP here recently. Liquidity is drying up, and the order book is going to gap much higher when there's not enough XRP to meet the demand on the open market. I think, again, around $100 XRP is what we're going to see in the not too distant future. And that's where I think it'll start being used. So again, I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but hopefully it gives you some insight. And again, appreciate the super chat and the kind words. We got Epic. They say, Jake, if XRP is still at $2 to $3 by the end of Q1, what would you think, and where would we likely go from there? Still 3 to 4 digits in 2026. I don't think it's going to be that low by the end of Q1. But that's also with the anticipation of a lot of these global macroeconomic events that I've talked about playing out in the not too distant future here. With where the Japanese bonds are, with the conflicts in the Middle East, with other geopolitical players fighting over different things, I don't think that things, and where gold and silver are at, I mean, it's very obvious to people right now that fiat is burning. People don't want to hold dollars. People don't want to hold their money in the bank. They're going to have to shore up the system in the not too distant future, and they need a reason to do that. They need a problem reaction solution. So if you want to call it conspiracy, Evernode is supposed to finalize their SPAC here in Q1. Maybe there's something to that. Take advantage of things. Ripple has pretty much locked up all the licenses that they need to be able to operate globally. Here just recently this month, they finalized the stuff in the UK to be able to operate globally. Now they're at Davos. Just timing on stuff seems to line up here for Q1 in some way. Again, it could be kicked. It could take much longer. We might, see it happen later in the year or even into 2027. It's going to require these events to play out. And they've kicked the can a lot longer than I thought they could. I mean, I've been talking about this for 2 years. I feel like Michael Burry at this point. He was talking about the housing market collapse for 2 years before it actually unwound, and he made a lot of money doing that. I feel like I'm in a similar position. So, March will be 2 years. We'll just have to see how things go. We've got Michael, Mr. Pitch Forward. He says, Jake, no question, just gratitude. Thank you for all that you're doing and sharing. Thank you. Thank the Queen of Tea for supporting you, spending time with us. Appreciate you. And cheers to the tea lady. Appreciate you guys and my beautiful wife. All right. We've got the Cowboy Preacher. Very good name. Good afternoon, Jake, to you and your amazing wife. Thank you so much. You have opened my eyes up on how to look at my asset rather than selling. I will onboard with you at Price Appreciation. God bless you. God bless you, man. Looking forward to working with you. We'll continue to innovate and bring products to market and create solutions for the entire, XRP family and broader ecosystem. I don't know if you guys saw this or not. It kind of flew under the radar. We actually launched our Bitcoin product last week, which is custodied with Fidelity. So Digital Wealth Partners partnering with 2Prime and Fidelity on a $250 million fund for Bitcoin. Pretty big deal. We now have a relationship with Fidelity, which is awesome. And you only need at least $500,000 in Bitcoin. It would only be $10 million in Bitcoin for you to be able to get access to this type of product. We're going to continue to work out things where we democratize access for people that don't hold, crazy amounts of crypto. I know a lot of people still think that's a crazy amount of crypto, and I would tend to agree with you. That's probably a large portion of a lot of people's portfolio. $500,000 is a lot of money to a lot of people. At Digital Wealth Partners, you only need $100,000 worth of XRP in order to become a client over there. To be able to get institutional custody with anybody else, the other family offices here in the US that work with crypto, there's only one of them now. You need at least $20-25 million in crypto to even approach them. And we work with people that have, as little as $100,000 in XRP. So we'll continue to bring solutions to market to democratize access. We got to start somewhere, and we are light years ahead of anybody else in this space doing what we're doing. So really excited to get that product to market. Really cool to be able to create that relationship. And again, I think that says a lot about, the validity of Digital Wealth Partners. Fidelity is a very old and prestigious firm. And for them to be willing to partner with us on us, we're very grateful and excited to be working with them in that capacity. We've got, I cannot read this Chinese or Japanese writing, and I apologize. They say, Jake, mastermind member here, awesome, from Japan. That's what we're talking about. They say, weird question, does the XRPL work in space? Could people transfer money to and from Mars? I don't know if you've ever seen the commercial, but Ripple has a commercial of an astronaut sending a payment. So the answer to your question is yes. It absolutely can work in space. You would just need internet access. And with Starlink, things that make you go, we talk about that a lot. Elon wants to colonize Mars. If you wanted interplanetary commerce, you would need a distributed ledger technology that allowed you to transfer value real time between economies in space and settle. when you listen to Greg Kidd, he talks about an intergalactic currency, and that XRP is an intergalactic currency. And he talks about Star Trek and a lot of stuff. And he sounds a little bit crazy, but to answer your question, yes, XRP would absolutely work in space. And I do believe that the long-term benefit of XRP, and again, like, this is the hard stuff. GDP is really kind of capped per capita, how many people can work in an economy right now. But as we have AI agents and we have, humanoid robots, that becomes uncapped. Like the economic output, people, they don't have to sleep, they don't have to take time off, they don't get sick like people do. It'll explode. GDP will explode across the countries. And then you're going to have multiple economies, right? Like if we do colonize other planets, if we have metaverses, all of these things are 24/7, 365 moving along. They're not capped by the amount of people or humans limitations. So you can imagine, like, people talk about total market cap and total value that exists today in markets, and they think that, $1 trillion company or $1 trillion digital assets crazy. The market caps of these digital assets that are the underlying protocols that are going to move value between all of these economies is going to have to be exponentially higher and greater in value than pretty much anything else in history in order to be able to facilitate that. And they will continue to expand with all of this technological innovation that's going to happen over the next decade. So anyway, all that being said, I think a lot of people are highly underestimating how high these prices of digital assets can go because they're paradigms around today's market cap. We got Francis, not sure what more of a sign we need. I am not a dead, but I know signs. John Mayer plays Ripple and delivers emotional eulogy for Bob Weir. XRP. I love it. Very cool. The Walking Dead. I assumed he mean Deadhead. But there's a band that plays a song called Ripple. It's interesting. Again, all things that make you go, we've got average golfers Ohio. Says Jake, happy Carbon One member, awesome dude, glad to see you here, and love the mastermind. Hope you have you had any conversations in January that make you feel really bullish about XRP in Q1? No predictions, of course. Take a drink of tea for yes. That's where I will leave it. There definitely been some good conversations this month. Jake, social member here. Awesome. Glad to have you. Appreciate you being part of the community. They say, looking to upgrade, please explain how your company custodies XRP. What is the chain of command? What are the complexities? And why do you consider it to be the best? There's a lot of really good questions here. So we'll kind of tackle them one by one. Explain how our company custodies XRP. So Anchorage is our custodian. We're looking to partner with other custodians over the long term to be able to diversify our holdings across other reputable custodians. Again, voila, Fidelity. Fidelity doesn't hold XRP today, but they hold Bitcoin. And Digital Wealth Partners now has a relationship over there, which is cool, through 2 Prime, which is another fantastic partner, by the way. So that's institutional custody in Anchorage. They were the first OCC federally chartered bank before the 5 provisional licenses were given here recently to Ripple, Circle, Paxos, BitGo, and one other one. Those are provisional licenses. The license at Anchorage is already instated. It happened in Trump's first term. And the reason they got that through was because they had a very limited scope of what they wanted to provide. They just wanted to do custody for digital assets. So they got that through. BlackRock, you might have heard of them. They moved all of their assets for their ETFs over to Anchorage. And that's because of their infrastructure. It is the safest place to hold your crypto currently. We create FBO accounts, or for the benefit of, you still own the crypto in the account at Digital Wealth Partners at Anchorage. We democratize access to that. Normally, you would need a very significant amount of crypto to even approach Anchorage to be able to hold your assets there. You'd have to be a very high net worth individual and have, again, a large allocation in digital assets. So we, again, democratize access to that, create account. We have about $1 billion in under management, most of that being XRP. They're at Anchorage. And these are segregated bankruptcy remote insured accounts up to $100 million. It's important to, there's a lot of nuance on all this stuff with bankruptcy remote, right? So if Anchorage went through a bankruptcy, you would still have to go through the bankruptcy with them, but they would never be, you would never be a creditor. Your assets would stay there the whole time. And, whoever took over the trust charter and the bank would then allow you to access your assets. There's a few other options that are relief of stay where that wouldn't be the case. There's a large bank in New York where that's the case. And they would be cool if we could partner with them at some point. So that's that on the custody side. What's the chain of command? So I am an owner, Digital Wealth Partners, but I do not run the day-to-day. I'm not involved with the business over there. Obviously, I have a vested interest in the company because we own the business, but I don't manage the day-to-day, really have a whole lot of say in how things go. Erin Freeze is our president of Digital Wealth Partners, and there is a board that she's on. Max Kahn is the CEO of Digital Wealth Partners, and then we just brought on a new lady that is the COO of Digital Wealth Partners. We also have hired a compliance officer. Max Kahn he still is the compliance officer until she takes that seat here in the next couple months. We have a full C-suite there, and then we have the advisors that are underneath the lead advisors. So we have, kind of one head advisor that then has multiple pods. Each one of the pods has a lead advisor and sub-advisors, or junior advisors, if you want to call them that. And then they all have customer service reps that are beneath them. About 40 employees there at Digital Wealth Partners at this point. I think we have 27 total advisors and a little over 3,000 clients at Digital Wealth Partners. So that's chain of command. And what are the complexities and why do you consider it the best? So for the security component at Anchorage, again, I talked about, them being bankruptcy remote, insured, segregated accounts. They use a derivative of copper. So MPC technology is what a lot of these platforms like Fireblocks and others use. To be FIPS compliant here in the US, you have to use HSMs, which are hardware security modules. So they've used copper, which is normally MPC technology, and added HSM component to that. And what they do is they encrypt the keys that they generate for the wallets when they spin one up for you, or inside their infrastructure. They encrypt the keys, they shard the keys, and then they hold the shards of the keys across the HSMs. These HSMs are in level 4 facilities. Many people, I don't know if they still operate this way, but Digital Trust, which does custody or used to do custody for Bitcoin IRA. I don't know if they do anymore or not. Used to be in a level 4 facility on a ledger, right? So an individual would go in there and they would still transact on your behalf, see your keys, all that stuff. Inside Anchorage, nobody ever sees the keys. It's done on an algorithmic blockchain. And it's really kind of overlay ledger. It's analogous to a blockchain. And there's multiple people that have to sign off. It's multi-sig in order to be able to execute a transaction. We're one of those parties. You're one of those parties. And, a lot of things have to happen in order for assets to be able to leave the ecosystem. They have the most robust security. The keys, when they're reconstituted to be able to execute a transaction, never actually come all the way back together. And that's one of the reasons that, their security is so high. One of the other things, you could call it's not quantum proof, but it's definitely quantum resistant, a lot of the stuff that they do. And again, this is why BlackRock decided to move their assets to Anchorage to custody them. And I'm actually going to have Anchorage in the mastermind. I don't know if it's going to be this Saturday or next, but they're going to come in and talk about all of this stuff and more and how all that works. I don't know that we're going to get Nathan or not, but we may have Joe Medioli or Ben Hearn, who we work with there. Ben Hearn is the head of their wealth management division, and I think Joe is on the C-suite. And then obviously Nathan's the CEO and founder of Anchorage. So we're going to have one of those people in the mastermind here in the near future to answer all the questions from the community. So if you, again, want to get access to that, want to understand all those complexities, like you just mentioned, we would love to have you there in the mastermind. You just go to beyondbroke.com, use code beyondbroke, the number 1, and then MO gets you the first month at a small discount. The other thing that I haven't mentioned that I'm going to touch on before we wrap up here is, again, the webinar, just to reiterate for you guys, we have a Living Trust webinar on Thursday. Please go register for that. We also have an insurance webinar on Thursday. If you want to learn about insurance and digital assets and how all that works, it's going to be, this insurance webinar is not for everybody. Okay. It's going to be primarily for business owners, people that, have a higher income or equity ownership in a business. We're going to touch on split dollar and some of the more complex strategies to be able to, write off your insurance and get the benefit of that. So again, I don't expect that to have as many people, but I think it's going to be really interesting and applicable for the people that do have those things. So highly recommend that. And then again, the LLC component is where a lot of people will do the living trust. We're going to talk about the assignment of the LLC and the digital assets to your living trust on Thursday this week. So if you need an LLC, again, to manage your digital assets, if you've got at least $50,000 to $80,000 in crypto, I would encourage you to go look at us as an option, learn all that you can about it. You can work with another attorney. I think that we're going to be more economical than most people. But for $2,000 end to end, you get the corporate veil service, you get an EIN, articles of organization, certificate of good standing, registered agent, the template for the operating agreement, which is going to cost you, $1,800 to $2,500 if you go work with an attorney out of Wyoming that does it the right way. There's not a whole lot of them that understand how to structure this as a holding company versus a trading company and why that matters. That you need to do, a single member LLC and not a multi-member LLC to be able to mitigate the taxes because you might have a step up in basis or change in time frame if you do a partnership. They're not going to understand that 15 states have a qualified joint venture between you and your spouse, that you'd be able to circumvent that and when it's appropriate to use it, when it's not. So all those things, we do that. This is our day to day. We have done over 7,000 LLCs to manage digital assets versus other people. And again, we've offered this living trust alongside that so that you get the probate protection alongside the creditor protection and the anonymity that the LLC provides you. So again, if you want to check that out, you can go to digitalfamilyoffice.io and you can use the code 50OFFDAGLLC. That's 50OFFDAGLLC. Get you everything end to end for your crypto LLC. The holding company there. So it's 50 off DAG LLC. Rick Johnson, we already did this one, man, but I appreciate the compliment on the beefcake. He says, we got Dr. Denise, or Dr. Dennis. They say, hello, Jake, mastermind member. Appreciate all that you do. There's another Dr. Denise in our mastermind. That's why it was throwing me off. I appreciate you. Anyway, she goes by DD most of the time. You've mentioned ETFs alone should push XRP to $50 to $100 range. When do you expect ETF-driven price movement to start showing up? Once the available supply on the OTC desk and the dark pools are gone or very low, that volume will start moving to the exchanges. That's when we will see that demand move in. And again, I think a BlackRock ETF will be announced about the time that happens. Yeah, that's what I'm waiting on. And I don't think there's a whole lot left. Maybe 150 million or less available on the OTC desk or the dark pools. Last week there was a lady that came out and said, she knew of about 100 million XRP that was available on the OTC desk. Falcon X bought Wisdom Tree, 21 shares And so obviously their dark pool is going to be completely allocated for that ETF. They're not going to be selling XRP to anybody else. And there's only 3 other dark pools for XRP that I know of. There could be more, but that's the ones I know of. Brooks 2791 says, when do you think XRP will be too big to suppress and manipulate? God bless you and your family and all that you do. Thank you. God bless you. Appreciate you taking the time, ask good questions, and hang out. Again, once there's a catalyst and a crisis, I think that's when things are going to move here. We've got DZVN. They've talked about the reverse carry trade and the Japanese bond. Looking forward to the holes, to more hole-in-ones. He has 6. How do you have 6 hole-in-ones? That's crazy. I only have 1. But I'm going to play more golf this year. That's on my that was my New Year's resolution. I want to play 24 rounds of golf this year, and I want to get my handicap back down to a 5. So, I'll actually plug those in and see where it ends up. Long drive is over, 65 in a few months. Appreciate the super chat. And I'm sorry to hear about your hip. Glad you got it replaced, and excited to see you have some more hole-in-ones. We'll probably do a golf tournament for the mastermind. I don't know what it'll be this year in 26, but it's something that's on the roadmap for us. We'd love to do some type of like charitable, golf tournament. Maybe do a shamble or a scramble or something, and have a bunch of sponsors and donate to some good causes. We'll try to orchestrate that here in the near future. We got Brooks again. He says, legend. I'm confused why XRP price is suppressed. It seems it benefits those getting in, but discourages those that have been in for a while. Why has it been suppressed for so long? Again, they're waiting for the opportune time to push it to the prices it needs to be to save the day. We got DFW Mike, my man. He says, evening, Jake. We missed you on Sunday. Korean barbecue was awesome, along with the conversation. You have allowed individuals across the same state with common cause to come together that would have never met. Thank you for the spark. You're telling me, dude, I am so blown away by the cool, all the cool people that have got to meet each other that, otherwise wouldn't have, and are going to be able to continue to cultivate these relationships far beyond the mastermind. I think it's something special for people to be able to meet in their state or in their local area with other cool people that have aligned interests and mindsets. It's just feel very blessed and humbled to be in a position to connect people and provide value. And I'm like most excited to see what comes out of it. I think people are going to be able to do a lot of really good stuff that God puts on their heart by coming together, and it'll be a force multiplier. So thank you for being part of that. And it's, encouraging it in the group. Again, none of this is possible without you guys. I don't say that enough. If we didn't have cool people that wanted to watch me talk about stuff or be, part of the mastermind or, work with us on the services that we're creating, none of this matters. So thank you guys for all, your trust and also willingness to work with us, participation in the community. It's again, huge blessing to see. Take one more and then we'll wrap it up tonight. We got Jack Tavern. He says, DWP client and Carbon One, glad to have you. Best contact to switch Texas LLC to Wyoming for anonymity. Is it possible? I've emailed DAG info, but no response. Stay blessed. You're not going to be able to get the anonymity. So if there's a transfer from one state to the other, your information is still going to be present on those documents because they were publicly listed at some point, and anybody that goes back and looks is going to be able to find that audit trail. You're going to want to file a completely new entity in Wyoming with the attorney, whether that's us or somebody else. That's all good. You're going to get that anonymity, and you're going to want them to maintain the ongoing filing for you. I this weekend got to chat with a gentleman. He wants us to file it and set everything up, and then he's going to transition, the ongoing maintenance to his attorney. We can do that too. We don't mind doing that at all. Again, we just want to provide value and structure things the right way off the jump so that people have the best advantage over the long term. And it sounds like that's what you want. I wish we could, transfer the LLC into Wyoming, and get the anonymity for you. Unfortunately, like I said, there's just an audit trail of that transition. And because you filed it in Texas first, all your information is going to appear publicly on that. And there isn't really a way to like erase that. So if you really do value the anonymity and that is what you want, I would file a new LLC in Wyoming. Again, doesn't have to be with us, but if you want to use us, you just go to digitalfamilyoffice.io and use the code 50OFF LLC. That'll get you everything for $2,000, the full first year of corporate veil, all the things to have it done the right way. And that's a wrap. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up for tonight. Again, if you want to work with Digital Wealth Partners, we would love to have you over there. If you got Bitcoin and you want to put it to work, the strategy that they have rolled out has had 38% returns over the past 5 years. So not crazy, but about 1.22% return per month on average over the duration that it has been operational. And again, we're giving you access to that through Digital Wealth Partners and Fidelity. You're not going to get that anywhere else. So if you have at least $500,000 in Bitcoin, we would love to talk to you about that. If you have at least $100,000 in XRP, we would love to talk to you about that too. It's just digitalwealthpartners.net, or you can email info@digitalwealthpartners.net, and our team over there will get back to you. And if you go to the website, it's the contact us form. And then again, aside from the LLC and the other stuff we provide, and the webinars that we talked about, and all the other wonderful things, John Deaton's event tomorrow, you can go to the mastermind, check things out there. It's beyondbroke.com and use the code beyondbroke, number 1, and then MO, like Mary Oscar, all capitalized, get you a discount on the first month, whether that's Carbon One or Social. And this is it. This is the last month for any new social members there in the group. Again, appreciate you guys taking time out of your Monday to come hang out with me and ask great questions. If I missed your super chat, again, just send it in on social media. We'll print them off. We'll get to them Wednesday. I hope you'll have a wonderful night, a wonderful week. We'll see you on the next one.